Hi everyone, my name's Jim Harrold. I'm your instructor for PA8566 for the summer of 2016. And each week I will give you a lecture and post it on the Blackboard site. And this week, of course, is no exception. During this week's lecture, I want to introduce the course and I want to talk about where we plan to go during this summer. So let's get right into that. All right. You can see here I have 7 purposes of this course. Let me skip right to number 7. Dr. Craig Maher, our chair of the MPA program, asked me to teach this course this summer, and I jumped at the chance because I think it's an exciting topic, but we haven't offered this course in quite a while. So what I'll be looking for at the end of the course is some honest feedback, and I will use that to improve the course in the future, and also to share with Dr. Maher on how we can jointly as a faculty improve the course in the future. So let me get to some of the other purposes. And really, I can break these purposes into a couple of categories. One is just understanding what we're talking about. So you see purposes 1 and 2. I talk about the historical and the constitutional background of U.S. intergovernmental relations, and I talk about how federalism works and how it's worked really over the past 230 years. This is 2016, and we view levels of government, the relationships between levels of government, in a certain way. That history is a history of evolution since 1787. And so I want to spend some time talking about that. And then I want to talk about you as the public manager and how this intergovernmental management environment, intergovernmental relations environment affects you. And one of the ways it affects you is understanding what this idea of fiscal federalism, what some people might call coercive federalism, is all about. And then finally, look at purposes 5 and 6. I want you to be able, as in all classes, to specialize just a little bit, and I will get into my method for doing that in just a moment here in the presentation. But typical of any graduate level class, there will be a term project, and I construct that a little bit differently for this summer, and I will describe that in a second. But the purpose of the project is to give you a chance to explore a particular problem in the area of intergovernmental relations or intergovernmental management. So why should we care about this? Here's a quote right from our Meek and Thurmeyer text, and you can read this. But the key point is that the field has evolved rapidly, they say in the last decade. And that's true. Really, it's evolved. Intergovernmental relations have evolved since about the 1930s forward. And you see there they talk about this idea of diminishing vertical resources. Well, what that means simply is that the federal government has mandates for state and local governments, but the dollars have diminished, relatively speaking. And so how do you, as the intergovernmental manager, how do you as the local manager cope with that? One of the ways that you cope with it, and they mention it here, is this idea of cross-jurisdictional and interlocal agreements. And you do that, look at this last sentence, to meet the demands of both this vertical relationship and the horizontal relationship. And you do that in particular areas. And you notice they talk about emergency management and environmental issues, but it's not confined to those. And I'll talk about how I think this operates in just a little bit. On this slide, I want you to click on this link here. And this is going to take you to this report that the Pew Charitable Trust did in 2014. And you see the headline of the report. Federal funds provide nearly $1 in $3 of state revenue. Well, across the board, all 50 states, what we see is that for each state's total budget, the federal revenue accounts for at least a third and in some cases 40% or more of the total state budget. It wasn't always this way, but it is certainly this way now. So, what you see typically in a state legislature when they construct their budget every year or every 2 years, as is done in Nebraska, they spend a lot of their time. The state legislatures spend a lot of their time in constructing their general fund budget, and their general fund is typically supported by revenues from tax dollars within the state, income tax or sales tax or property tax, and fees that the state is levying on various activities. And the general fund is a matter of great deliberation in most state legislatures. The rest of the budget is a matter of deliberation as well, but a big chunk of the rest of the budget is from federal sources. And so this is really important to understand that intergovernmental management and intergovernmental relations have a lot to do with the amount of money coming from the federal government. Now, this slide demonstrates what I just talked about from 1940, as World War II was starting, forward to the 21st century. And Mr. Edwards, who wrote this article, you can see he works for Cato Institute. So you probably can understand that he has a certain ideological view, but whatever his ideological view, the facts are unchanged. That the growth of federal aid to states has increased dramatically, and especially since 1965. Because in the mid-60s, President Lyndon Johnson came up with his Great Society programs, which included the two pillars of that are Medicare and Medicaid. And so those programs being administered at the state level has greatly increased the amount of federal dollars that flow into states. And states have to account for that money and spend that money in accordance with a lot of federal guidelines. And so it's just simply a fact that state budgets are greatly impacted by federal dollars. Well, let me just talk about all of us in the class for just a second. And I have about 3 slides here. And as it turns out, on the day I'm recording this, which is the 10th of May, not everyone has put their names or has included their introduction yet, which is fine. I'm going to update these slides so that I include everybody, but I'm going to shut up for just a second and let you look at where everybody's coming from. I start with myself, and I think those of you who viewed my intro probably saw this, but I was in the Air Force for 26 years, and I did specialize in installation management. But I also worked at the Federal Interagency when I was in a joint assignment. And but my current academic research is in policy and budgeting. And so it's really interesting to me to see how policies and budgets meet up with each other, and it's really interesting to me to see how they meet up with each other at the implementation stage, often at the state level. But take a look at what all of you are involved in over the next 3 slides, and you can see that we have really a diverse class, and I'm really happy about that. And I'm really happy to see that people have a lot of different jobs in federal, state, and local governments. So just continue to look at this list for just a second, and I will come back in a minute here. Okay, so I think what you get from that is that we have like I said, a really diverse class, and I think we're going to benefit each other from our experiences. And as an instructor, of course, I'm always very happy about that. And so please do stay in contact with each other. I think some of you have had classes before in our online program, and so I continue to encourage all students to stay open to each other and communicate with each other, because I think a lot of learning, frankly, takes place student to student. So here is how this course is laid out. This is all in the syllabus. There's 4 units, and basically the units follow this evolution of intergovernmental relations and intergovernmental management. For weeks 1 through 3, I'm going to talk about what we call foundations. And that is, I'm going to have you read some of the ancient texts. And by that I mean the Constitution itself and some of the Federalist Papers. And then I also want to talk about models of federalism and how scholars have theorized that federalism either works in fact or should work from a normative sense. In the Unit 2, I talk about new realities, which is this idea of fiscal federalism, or as some people call it, coercive federalism. Unit 3, that title, Interjurisdictional Cooperation to Collaboration, weeks 7 through 8, that's right out of the text, that title, the Meek and Thurmeyer text, and we're going to talk about some strategies there. Then finally, week 4, I'm going to allow you to specialize in this challenges for the new Intergovernmental Manager unit. I have 3 tracks in that unit. I have an emergency management track, I have a healthcare track, and I have a city to other governments track. So what I'm going to ask each student to do when we get to that unit 4 is specialize and pick one of those tracks, meaning you won't have to do all the readings that are assigned for all 3 tracks, but you'll just have to focus on your track. And then finally, week 13, my plan for week 13, the last week of the course, is to allow each of you to post and present your projects. And I'm going to talk about your projects in just a second here. Let me get to this last thing. I'm trying this as an experiment. I've set up a Twitter account called @UNOPA Scholars. You can see it there. It's on Twitter, and I have a hashtag PA8566. My intent for this Twitter account is to post articles from the popular media or any other source that have to do with intergovernmental management or intergovernmental relations. So I'm not focusing on, for example, the presidential election. I do realize this is 2016, and I do realize we have a very interesting presidential election cycle coming up, but that's not the kinds of articles that I'm going to be posting, unless a candidate is talking about intergovernmental relations or intergovernmental management. But what I want you to do as an experiment is see how much source material you can find that actually talks about this area of relations between levels of government in the United States and interlocal agreements and things like this, and then post them. If you have a Twitter account, you can post them, and you can use this hashtag PA8566. And I just want to see how many articles we can generate. I'll post some, and I'll ask you to post some as well using that hashtag. So let me get to the 3 main course requirements. You can see on this slide it goes from number 1 to number 3, because I'm going to talk about number 2 on the next slide. So number 1, Blackboard discussions. I have about 10 discussions lined up, and that amounts to about 100 total points, 10 points per discussion. This is a graduate level class, so I am expecting you to be insightful and analytical in your discussion posts. And that means you can use sources. You can use sources beyond what I have assigned and cite those sources. And then I would expect people to ask, when you're responding to each other, to ask some fairly insightful questions and challenge each other. When I say challenge each other, of course I tell every class this, graduate and undergraduate, let's not throw flaming darts at each other, but let's challenge each other on our thinking. So 10 discussion posts, or 10 discussion weeks at least. Reading reflection papers. I will post these on the assignments tab on the Blackboard site. Basically, I plan on having 4 of these reading reflection papers, and they'll be throughout the semester. They'll be worth 25 points each. I want you to be aware that on the tab on the Blackboard site called Syllabus and Important Information, I have posted an example format paper for you to use. So please look at that example and write your papers using that as the format. Okay, here's number 2. Number 2 is really a big chunk of the grade, 125 total points, and that's our term project. 25 points of that is going to be a term project proposal, which is going to be due on June 4th. So what's the term project? The term project is not a paper. First of all, it's not a term paper, it's a presentation. And when I say presentation, I mean what I want each student to do is design what I call a professional PowerPoint presentation. You could also use Prezi. You could also make a video. The parameter on all of this is that it is presentable in about a 12 to 20 minute time block, that it has voiceover if you're using a PowerPoint presentation. If you're making a video of your presentation, that's fine too. That same parameter applies, 12 to 20 minutes. Each presentation should also include a 500-word detailed abstract, which you'll submit as a Word document, and a separate reference page, which you'll submit as a Word document as well. So what am I talking about here? Basically, I'm asking each student to assume that you're giving a presentation to a decision maker. That could be your board, that could be your supervisor, that could be the mayor, that could be the governor, just anybody you assume. And you're going to talk about a problem that has to do with intergovernmental management or intergovernmental relations. And so I invite you to ask me questions about that in advance. And frankly, that's the reason I do the proposal paper, so that you can propose what you want to do. If I think that you maybe need to add something or delete something from it, that's going to be your chance to do that in that proposal paper. But the problem statement will describe a problem in IGM or IGR. And then you're going to, in the presentation, talk about some of the literature that speaks to the problem, because I do want you to research the literature. And by researching the literature, I want you to tell me, what the literature has to say about meaningful aspects of the literature, not simply list it and give me an annotated bibliography. And then I want you to talk about proposed solutions to the problems. And this portion, gives enough information for this assumed decision maker to make a decision. And then finally, what is your recommended action? What would you do about the problem? So that's the basic shell of how I want your presentations to go. It has to include those elements. It can certainly include more elements. I want you to really be as innovative as possible, but it has to be your work. One thing I do say in the syllabus, it's not on this slide. I know a lot of us work for governmental agencies right now. I don't want you to rehash a project that you've already done. I don't want you to take a project that you did last year in your work environment and just represent that. You can use problems that you have in your work environment. In fact, I invite you to do that. It's just that I ask you not to just recycle something you've done before. That actually meets the technical definition of plagiarism. So I'd really rather that you didn't do that. In fact, don't do it. So that's the term project requirement. So here we are, last slide. This is week 1. This is what I want you to do. If you haven't already done so, please introduce yourself. You notice on my introduction I include a video. You can include a video. You can include an audio stream. You can include pictures. That's great with me. I welcome that on any discussion. I want you to read the readings I have assigned for you this week. And that'll also help you. Finding out where all this stuff is helps you get familiar with the layout of the Blackboard site. That's number 2. Finally, number 4. Contact me if you have concerns or questions. And by all means, if you find media articles, please that have to do with IGM or IGR, post them on Twitter and use that hashtag PA8566. So I look forward to this summer and learning from all of you and all of us learning from each other. Thanks very much.